Sound? Speed? Okay, go ahead and tap it.
Just the top, yep.
No, right there. There. That's it. You can come out. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Sounds okay, Kev?
Perfect.
Okay. So introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and where were you born, and how long you been in Gaborone?
Well, my name is Mildred Grant Gray. My name before I was married was Grant, so I use that in my name now. And I was born in Gaborone, May 13th on Friday in 1920. And I lived in Gaborone most of my life, most of my adult life, and I was just only away for a short period when I went to college, and then I worked over in the steel plant for 4 years as a private secretary, and then I was married, and at that time you weren't allowed to work if you were married on the steel plant in the office where I worked. So I had to give up, and then I was going to have a baby, so my husband got sick, and we moved to Gaborone. And 1 year we looked after the post office. His mother had been looking after the post office for 45 years, and she was retiring, so we looked after it for 1 year. So that gave us a little money because we had no money, and we had a little baby then. And so in 1947, I started to take a course in Morse code, and that was in November, and in March I took over the telegraph office from the lady who was also ill at the time, and she died, and so I took over the office in November.
Good. Let's talk about, we're going to go back a little bit in 1920s and 30s. What do you remember? Let's talk about Gaborone, because Gaborone is almost 300 years old in 2016. So let's talk about Gaborone when you were being raised in Gaborone.
Yes.
What were your feelings at that time? And if you had left Gaborone, which I think you said you did for a bit, did you miss Gaborone?
Well, there were many more people living here at that time, and I went to school when I was 6 years old in the little schoolhouse up on the road from here, and they were building a new schoolhouse at the time, so I only spent 1 year there, and then I moved into the new schoolhouse, and there was 60 children in the school that I went to, and the lady who taught me in grade 4 just died at 101 last week. And when we were growing up here, it was much different than it is now. Families were more connected with each other, and the children all played together. There was no discrimination of any kind at all at that time. And we all played together, and we played outdoors. We were outdoors children. We in the summer we had nice beaches to swim, and in the winter we had skating and coasting, tobogganing, and then when I got older we had parties on the lake and that. But when I was a child, there was many more fishermen here. But in 1902 there was 1,000 people living here. But after that, the steel plant in Sydney opened, and quite a few of the younger people especially moved to Sydney. Lobsters were like 2 cents a pound, and codfish was about 2 cents. And everybody mostly had a cow and a garden. They called it a kitchen garden. And they had their own butter and milk and cream, and there was no. Everybody drank. I don't know. A lot of them lived a long life like me, but we we had raw cream and raw milk, and I guess raw butter too. And when I was a little girl, in 1929, we had a severe earthquake. The earthquake wasn't destructive, but we had what we called a tidal wave, and it came over the seawall, and it was people were rowing boats. Even up here where I live, the water was up here, and you could row a boat out in the other yard over here, and it caused a lot of destruction to all buildings and boats, and besides that, the seawall was practically demolished at that time. And at that time, it wasn't a seawall as of now. It was, we always called it the brush fence, and it was just posts in the ground alternately, and between the posts were just trees cut down and laid diagonally in the posts. And then it was supposedly that the sea, when it came up, it would bring up a lot of rock and sand, and that would fill in the cavities where, I guess you'd say, where the trees would lose their branches. And that's how it was for many years. My father was born in 1884, and I have a picture of him when he was about 12 years old, and the seawall was there then. And it was always under the government rule and government building and everything, because nobody in that time had money to build a 600-foot seawall to protect any place. Even in my day, the road was on the beach, on the end of the seawall. And then later years, they made the Gull Cove Road. The Gull Cove Road was always on the beach, and therefore it would be, or people always knew, not even thought, but knew that it belonged to the Department of Highways, because they would maintain a road. And the other end of it would certainly belong to the Department of Transport. But they tell me now there was no such a thing as Department of Transport. And I worked for it for 18 years, so, you know, I kind of know that there was such a thing. But behind that, we always went swimming, and it was children in my day played outside a lot. They didn't have computer. We didn't even have electricity. And everybody, the women all looked after their garden and looked after the children. And the men, they didn't do much housework in my time. Like my father, he didn't know how to do any housework at all. And but the women would look after the house and the garden, and maybe some of them would even help down at the beach when they were drying their fish. They did a lot of cod fishing at that time, more than lobster fishing. Although there were a factory right in Gabroos, and there was one in, actually there was two in Gabroos, and one in Gull Cove, around probably 1918 and 17 and that time.
Okay, so let's talk about your years working as the 911 operator. That was it, right?
No. Switchboard.
Switchboard. Sorry, switchboard. So let's talk about your years as a switchboard operator.
Well, in 1947, I learned Morse code, And the lady who I learned it from died at that time. Actually, she died in November, and I started to learn it in 1947 in June. And then I took over her job. I knew how to, and I was frightened to death, and I didn't know Morse code either, and I took over, and it had been established in Gabarus in 1902, and in the last house it was in was the house across from here, but it was in our store, and it was in another store previous to that when they first established it. And the lady who learned it from Lewisburg, from the station there, the railroad station. They have a museum in that station now. And then she came home, and they opened the switch. In 1962, they eliminated the Morse code from all communication, and I start to work then for the Maritime Tel as a switchboard operator. And in the Morse code, I repeated in English from Lewisburg to Lordways on the coast, and then the same with the switchboard. And some in English and some I'd have to receive in French. And I'm not very fluent in French, but I took French in grade 10 and 11. We took our grade 11 in Gabarus and went to Sydney to write provincial examinations, but we had to go to Sydney to take our grade 12.
Okay, let's talk about Gabarus as a historical place. You were born in 1920, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Gabarus has been around since 1716.
Well,
as a child when you were growing up, and even now, can you talk about the history of Gabarus from the starting point, because it's even older than Canada itself?
Yes, it's the history of Gabarus.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Well, the history the Gabarus has different spellings of the name. The first spelling was the Spanish came ashore here with their fish to dry, or to cure, I guess you'd call it, on the beaches behind the seawall. And they were here for quite some time. And then the first siege of Lewisburg, the French took over the area, the Lewisburg and Kennington Cove areas. And then in the second siege of Lewisburg, the English took it over, and but they had an encampment, and we called it the island. It may have been an island at one time, but it's more like a peninsula now. And they had a hospital there and used both the French and English in the two sieges of Lewisburg. And
Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna stop you. Cut, guys. Cut. Sound, speed, and go ahead, Tim. All right. Let's introduce yourself, your name, and where were you born, and how long you've been here for.
My name is Mildred Grant Gray. I was born in Gabarus at home with a midwife in May 13th on Friday, 1920. And I lived in Gabarus most of my adult life. And I grew up here and worked here, and had a good, healthy life, I guess. I'm 93 years old, so I must have eaten the right thing. And we had a store all our lives in our family, so it was a little better than if we hadn't, I guess, because my parents used to say we're living out of the store, so that meant, I guess, that we had the store, we had other things than some people had.
What kind of store you had?
We had a general store, and it was a two-story building, and the main store, in the back of the store, there was another little building built on, and in there they kept coal and molasses and kerosene oil for lamps, because we hadn't any electricity until 1947. And so in the main part of the store, we had everything for fishing, like nails and ropes and all the equipment for fishing. And besides a general store, everything from, Grandpa used to say, the cotton for the women's aprons and glass for the windows or shoes for children and all kinds of groceries. We didn't have meat or, no, we didn't even have fish, but everything else. And then upstairs in the store, my mother had an ice cream parlor, and Daddy kept the caskets up there because he was the undertaker for the village. And when we were little, we used to play around the caskets and hide around the casket boxes. And we had a playhouse also upstairs in the store. And in the First World War, they used one of the rooms for Red Cross meetings, and the ladies would knit and send it to the soldiers overseas.
What was just keep looking at me at most times if you can.
Pardon?
Just keep looking at me.
All right.
Can you tell me some of your childhood memories?
My what?
Childhood memories.
Oh.
Growing up.
When I was growing up, in the summer, we spent a lot of time playing around the beach, swimming, and in boats, little rowboats around, and catching little fish with a stick with a string on it and a pin, a common pin. That's what we used to catch. They called them sculpins. I don't know how to spell it even. And then we'd play with each other, like we'd be playing, well, in the evenings, we all played ball, and we played other games also at school, but in the evenings in the summer, we'd all be together playing ball. And then later, like in the winter, we had skating and coasting and snow houses. We had a lot of snow in my time. And I had a pair of skis when I was 5 years old. Grandpa got them in Halifax. And I used to ski down the side of a hill over the fences. Everybody had a fence because they had a cow, and they all had to have a fence. And so we learned to skate very young.
I'm just going to interrupt you. So in your time, keep rolling eyes, were there farms?
Pardon?
Were there farms when you were growing up? Farmhouses, like cows and horses? And
Yeah, oh yes. Not farms. But everybody in this area had a cow, and a lot of people had horses. But we had, not in my time, but before I was born, Daddy had a horse. But we played together all you know, through our lives practically. And we're friendly, and the older people looked, you know, everybody's child was their child. Like everybody looked after everybody else. It was in the winter. My father, we always had ice on account of the store, and he would have a day and have men hired for cutting ice, and then we'd have ice all summer. And everybody, all the children, would come and get a piece of ice to put in their lime juice. Lime juice was our drink in the summer, and the sawdust would be floating on the top of it. But we'd take that off and drink the water.
Okay. Let's talk about in 1929 there was that the tidal wave, the storm. When the storm came in 1929,
Yeah.
and affected the seawall. Can we talk about that?
In November the 19th, 1929, we had a pig in our barn. Our barn was down the road, not by the house. And I was bringing back the bucket that Daddy had fed the pig. And I was walking up, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon on November the 19th. And everything was rattling, and people were running out and looking around and didn't know what was going on because they'd never had an earthquake, or nobody ever saw an earthquake. So the earthquake lasted about 5 minutes. And then in 10 o'clock in the evening, when the tide rose, we had what we used to call a tidal wave. And the tidal wave swept the brush fence, practically demolished it. And the water was way up in the fields, and the buildings, some of them went a quarter of a mile in the water to other areas. When it came in as one big wave first, and everybody, their fishing boats were up on the road, and everybody was very upset. You know, they were scared because. And then we had another tremor around 10 o'clock at that time. But the destruction of the tidal wave was very great. And then, of course, after that, the government owned the brush fence, or the seawall, as it's called now, and they started building a new one. And it's built in 3 sections, that seawall.
So this seawall has been...
It's in there now, yes. It's built in 3 sections. The last section of construction, I think, was in 1946. They started in the middle of it because that was where it was washed away, and then they did this end of it, and then they did the island, we call it, that end of it, at the last of it. Now in 1934, they tried another type of protection, and it was, of course, the federal government owned it and looked after it and maintained it and everything. And my grandfather had the doings of that time. In my time, there was like one representative of the government that, would get things done to anything that belonged to the government. And so they tried another 50 feet of another type of construction, but it washed away. It was just posts, and the rocks were supposed to catch in it. But there's more sand than rocks there, so it was a failure. So after that, then they started the first part of the seawall as it is now. And then a few years, I don't know what date it was, but they put it a little higher wall on the top of the seawall, because now the sea is much higher than it usually, was in my time, and there's so much more erosion on the coastline that every little bit of sea comes over it now, and it's. They put those rocks on the extension. All that rock extension was brush fence, but went away, and so they put those large rocks there.
So they built another seawall, if I'm not mistaken. Another storm came in 1983.
Pardon?
Another storm came in 1983.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, 1983.
83. Another
Yes,
storm came.
yes, yes. We had a big storm in '83, and washed part of it away also. And those rocks, I think, were put there in '83, and the tide was so high at that time, and the sea came over the whole part of the seawall, and even did away with the road. They had to establish a new route down at the end of the seawall to construct the road. And the boats from the storm were even up on the main road. And it took away part of the seawall, and then they reestablished it, the part that was demolished. But they put a top. We didn't have any boardwalks here. We didn't ever had much help from the government. Only the seawall or the lighthouse, but. The people in the village after that storm, some of them got together and bought planks and put some more covering on it, because although we don't have a boardwalk, people often call that the boardwalk, because hundreds of people walk that in the summer, tourists and people alike. And and it was a nice walk, and you'd get the breeze of the ocean and all that. But since a few years now, it's too demolished to you can't walk on it anymore. And it was a great attraction to be able to walk on it and jump over and swim on the other side of it, because the sand now is right to the top of it, so the least little seal finish it. And the village, maybe only in the summer in the winter there's about 78 or 80 people here, but in the summer we have a lot of people here.
Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna interrupt you. You said in the winter there are 78 or 80 people here, right?
Pardon?
In the winter there are 78 or 80 people here.
Yes.
But if you can say in the winter there are only 78 people here, and then in summer more people come in.
Oh yes.
If you can say that?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes. In the winter we have about 39 houses closed, and there's 42 open.
No problem. Do you need water?
Excuse me. And there's about 80 people here all winter.
No,
but in the summer we have probably 280.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of people come here in the summer.
I'm going to interrupt you. So what I want you to say that in the winter there are only 78 people here. Not about 80, only 78.
In the winter there's about 78 people living here. But will I go on?
Yeah. So
in the summer,
start from again. In the winter, there are only 78 people living here, but in the summer.
Yes, but in the summer there's probably 278, because we have a lot of people come here
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you.
And many of them who come here buy houses and live here from then on. We have one family here. They came on a cruise ship, and he was on he got off of the ship to see a few villages, and he got here and he went on the veranda of the place he bought, and he said, "Never mind, I don't care how much it is, I'm buying it." So now he's going to live here, Barry, and he likes it here.
So, Mildred, can you say everything else you said was great? I just want you to say this: in winter, there are only 78 people here. Only 78, but in summer there are 280 or whatever that number is.
Yeah.
Can you say that?
Yes.
Okay.
In the winter in Gaborone, there's only 78 people living here. But in the summer, of course, we have probably 278. A lot of tourists come here.
Okay, good. You need water?
Yes. Maybe she gets water.
Yeah.
I'll get some water.
Get some water for you.
Okay, let's cut, guys. Audio?
Speed.
So
you
just
move
one
over
bar left
to
now.
the left. This way,
Just make sure if it dies out, just cut it. Okay, go ahead. Perfect. Okay, let's talk about the storm in 2010. In 2010?
Yes. Yes, we had. That's the latest big storm we've had in 2010. And you'd say almost demolished the seawall, because the one end of it is twisted practically out of shape, and then over and probably 100 more feet of it, the sea came over and took away all the big rocks, and some of the plank is off of it, and it's all undermined now, so it's probably it's so long that there's no repair on it. It needs a whole new seawall, because even to patch it up, the other part that there's not patching, it certainly will soon be gone. And people lost a lot of their buildings, and that they didn't fall away, they didn't float away, but they were ruined, and their equipment that they store in their buildings, of course, too. So I can't understand why the government will not take responsibility of repairing or even renewing the seawall, because what do they think? The people's lives are in danger, and even if there are only 78 people in the winter, who wants to lose 78 lives? And not only their lives, but their livelihood, their equipment, their boats, and all their equipment that they have to pay for to keep on with their fishing industry.
Okay, excellent. Can you talk about how Gaborone has become, in a way, a very universal place where people from all over the world come here, within Canada, outside of Canada, and how people are related? Like, everybody here in Gaborone has relatives all over the world. But that being said, why do you think people outside, like, Tim and Jean and all these other people, why do you think they come to Gaborone?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of tourists come to Gaborone, especially in the summer. And then we have tourists who come to Gaborone just to see the village. And when they get here, they see the beauty, and the people welcomed them so much, and we're always happy to have newcomers. So most of them that come to look at the scenery and meet some people, they stay here. And the last probably 10 years, we've had probably 10 or 15 new families come and establish themselves here. And everybody loves everybody, and they welcome the newcomers, and many of them, or all of them, contribute greatly to the community in every way, and everybody respects them and likes them, and friendly. They're all friendly to the people, and they bring different ideas, and it's wonderful to have all these newcomers to the place. And we're starting back to where it was in 1902, when the population was 1,000 people. So hopefully we'll reach that goal soon. And at that time we had a doctor here, a dentist, a undertaker, and justice of peace, and all kinds of other professionals. But the population deteriorated so much that a lot of them had to go other places and establish their work.
Okay, keep rolling, guys. So, what I'm going to ask you now is that there are, like you said, why would the government not worry about only 78 people?
Yeah.
So we're gonna focus on that part more. The question, yes, is why, but why do you think they don't? Is it because they think that it's only 78 lives, or is it because they think that if they take care of Gabarus, they're going to have to take care of all the other coastal communities?
Yes.
So can you talk about that?
Yes.
I'll tell you
Yes.
when. Are you rolling, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Mildred.
Well, we're having difficulty now in establishing some ownership of the seawall, and repairs and renews, because it really all needs to be renewed. It's in bad condition, and we can't understand why the heads of the government, or I guess the heads of both governments, the provincial and federal, are not interested in a little place like Gabrus with only 78 people. Do they want, or would they take responsibility if those 78 people got drowned tonight with a storm? And it could easily happen, because they would be trying to save their property and trying to save their industry, and they probably wouldn't be able to care about their lives. And is that the idea, that why they don't bother with Gabrus and help them with this awful tragedy that happened to everybody by losing the seawall? And I don't know, why would it be? Is it that they're not interested in people's lives, or they're not interested in small communities, or they're
That's fine. So that's excellent. So to continue on that, you said small communities. So it's an issue that's bigger than Gabarus. Of course, Gabarus has 78 people, right?
Yeah.
But it's an issue that's more than just Gabarus. There are all these other coastal communities across Canada and across the world that have the same issue, because they have a small population,
Yeah.
and because it's not a tourist industry or anything like that, the government doesn't care about that. So let's just move away from Gabarus a little bit and talk about it's a universal thing. It's not just Gabarus. It has to be more than not just because there's this very small amount of life at a certain coastal community doesn't mean that it's not worth anything. Okay.
we still can't understand. But it's an issue not only in Gabroos, but there's other communities the same size that have demands or requests of assistance in other ways that protect their properties or floods and all kinds of things that we think the government should be responsible for, but they seem to be not focusing on any of the communities unless they're a lot bigger population than Gabroos and probably have more to contribute. But here in all these communities, you know, they have elections, they have voting the government in, whatever government may be in. And if they didn't have all those small communities, perhaps they wouldn't be elected to have these big jobs and not bother with the little ones that put them in their positions.
Okay,
So,
excellent. That's awesome. Let's talk about where you have grandkids and relatives. Where are they? Are they in Canada or outside?
yeah, they all are now.
Okay, so let's talk about that. It's not just about the 78 lives that are here, but also the connections that these 78 lives have across Canada and across the world. So if, God forbid, something was to happen here, it's not that these 78 lives are over. It's about what's going to happen to the people that are related to these 78
That
lives.
have okay.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, I have children, grown-up adult children, of course, at 93, and you know, people are all interested in their hometowns or their roots from the area, and everybody from Gabroos, many people have people living here that they're still interested, and a lot of them, when they retire, they're going to, we're going to establish our lives, the rest of them at home in Gabroos. And if such a thing, a tragedy like we're expecting any minute to happen, it affects more than the people just here, the 78 people living here. It affects all the people's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that have been brought up here, or their parents were brought up here, and they're all over the world almost. I have relatives all over the world almost, and they're all interested in the welfare of the people in Gabroos, and nobody can understand why the government is not taking full responsibility of the protection of their people.
Okay, just two more questions. You have grown up here, so obviously you must have seen a lot of wildlife, a lot of animals, a lot of birds, right?
Hmm.
Can you talk about what kind of wildlife you've seen all these years that you've been here? Okay.
So somebody told me yesterday they saw a fox with a beaver in his mouth running across the yards yesterday here in Gabroos. It's not unusual to have different wildlife here. We have a lot of seabirds and gulls, and all depending on the people's garbage or something. And we have raccoons. They're so cute, and we have all kinds of birds. I feed birds all the time, and they're so pretty, most of them. And we have rabbits, little rabbits, and mother rabbits. And we have coyotes, but they don't destruct anything or do any harm. But, you know, we're not you know, don't feel that we have to protect the coyotes, but the foxes, and we have all kinds of beautiful deer. I had 3 deer out in the field one day last week, a mother and father and a baby, and it was just beautiful. The little one with the parents, and
Can you talk about how the wildlife will be affected if there was?
and anyway, that's another thing about the wildlife. The wildlife, when there's nothing locally or nothing around much to eat, the wildlife always go to the beach behind the seawall and get their food there. You know, there's always a fish or something comes up on the shore there, and crabs and, you know, little fish. And now that the capelin season is going to be on, there'll be all kinds of foxes down on the back of the board of the seawall, eating capelin, and of course it feeds the gulls, and it's a protection to the foxes. They make their nests in the rocks and bring up their babies down behind there, and it's really. It's more than a protection to the village. It's a protection to all the wildlife and the village and the people and their industry, and you know, it's just a very sad thing for the people of the village to know that they're not being protected by their government, or because in my day that's you depended on the government, and they always came forward. But now they say they don't own it. So I can't, nobody can understand, even people away from here. They think it's so funny that the government is saying they don't own something that they built and maintained all through the years.
Okay, excellent. Can you talk about, we did it earlier, but because we had a technical issue, during the years when you were the switchboard operator, can you talk about that time?
When what?
When you were doing the switchboard operating stuff.
Oh.
Can we talk about those years when you were...
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
Well, and I worked for the Department of Transport. Now they say there was no Department of Transport. The government said that there was never a Department of Transport. Well, I worked for the Department of Transport myself in Gabroos for 15 years, and I sure worked. Anyway, I had a Morse code office, and I repeated in English over 7 phones. And I took it in Morse code, and sometimes I took it in French, although I don't know French, but I did. And they established the office and maintained it until 1963. And then they eliminated all Morse code offices. So I was the last office to close. And now I'm the last Morse code operator in the Maritimes living that worked for the Department of Transport, and the last Maritime tell person that had a switchboard, and I resigned from that in 1978, and we went dial then.
Okay. And this last question.
In 1947, we got electricity. So the Morse code office, I was running on batteries up until then.
Okay. Can you give her a glass of water again?
Oh, it's right beside me.
Oh, is it? There you go. I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then that's it.
Okay, my dear.
What do you want?
What's up?
Did you already ask her like what would happen if to her the thing came over?
Oh, you mean the storm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just make sure. Can we cut this?
Yeah.
Because I'm just afraid.
Okay. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to be interviewed by the Toronto paper, because we have lots of people in that area, in the Ontario area, and makes us wonder, what in the world are the people depending on, or in Canada, what are they depending on the government to help them survive, and even over the world, are the governments not looking at people's property and their livelihood and their lives that should be looked after by the governments, and we expect them to look after us because we voted them in with their positions, and they certainly are getting their wages or their pay from all the taxes we're paying and everything. And it's very sad that we have to go through all this to get some help, and not only in Gabarus, but all the other little villages and towns all over Canada and even the United States. They're having difficulties with their workforce and strikes, and it's all in the same area. They have one problem and we have another problem. But I think in our case, the government is very lacking in their regard for the smaller places and the smaller communities in our country. This is such a crucial request, and for our little community, but big other communities much larger. And it could be a storm and an ending to our village and other villages also. It could be us today and somebody else tomorrow, but we're all on the same planet, so we have to look after each other and do everything we can to bring happiness to our country, and respect and regard for our community and our country.
Excellent. Cut.